Response video to Fred conference report. I think I'll combine two videos. One he did on sentience and swarms, and the argument that there may be no biological reason to give organisms that have a practical utility of service to the hive um, disposability, sentience, or capacity to feel or engage in their existence on that level, on a necessity. And he sort of equated it to the fact that they have a disposable life, as if disposability was somehow, or mortality had something to do with the function of sentience and having it, almost as if we even act that way, that we survive because we wish to survive, that our accomplishment is to survive, almost like we procreate to do that, to have children. And I don't think that has anything to do with sentience. I don't think that has anything to do with the agenda of, especially the natural human. He had no conception of his mortality. He didn't probably have any direct knowledge of the implications of sex being related to the production of babies, even necessarily. The human in the ignorant state, the natural state, isn't going to draw these conclusions unless he has some circumstantial information to help him understand that. He's not going to understand it innately, let's say. If he's on a desert island, born on a desert island, and with the sexual complement, it's not going to draw. He's not going to have any pre-knowledge of this implication that he's going to have sex for the purpose of procreation, or that avoiding harm, damage, is somehow related to surviving. When it's just to the organism, it's a way of avoiding harm, damage, being hurt. Understanding the consequence of death isn't part of the animal organism's understanding. This is only something we've acquired through time. So I didn't want to get all caught up in that one. But it does relate to this other video he did on the point of life and this anti-natalist argument, and he's using the word purpose in life and where we derive it from. So I'll play this one clip. I wish it was more explicit. I can't entirely say exactly what he's saying.
So as I say, yeah, it's me thinking from that position, isn't it? So it's not that there's another. I'm not saying there's another purpose outside of human purpose. I think there is just human purpose, but human.
See, now that just doesn't wash with me. I mean, I think just as we are figured out through culture and acquiring knowledge, the implications of sex and disease, and that it was caused by microbes and all these different things that we've learned, I think we learn the context that our life isn't something we live personally, that there's all the other sentient beings have equal stake in the existence, that we're all pieces on a chessboard, and although we are unique, we're not unique in our function. So the pawns each one might have been cast a little different. It has different little defects, but they're all shaped like a pawn, and they all function like a pawn, and they're all playing on the board of existence. And an intelligence is going to understand that that's where the purpose derives, and how the function of the game board is played. It's not about how it impacts one single individual piece on the board. It's how it impacts the entire play of the game on the entire scope of the board. And that's the only rational place to deduce a purpose. And then I'd even go further, that to talk about human purpose, you have to talk about just the fact that it's just desire. It's just a need machine. I have a purpose because I have a penis. All right, that gives me direction and incentive and motivation. But I'm smart enough to know that's kind of lame and stupid as a purpose. It shouldn't be. It's a completely invalidated motivator. Hunger is just another incidental thing. I mean, it's created because, yes, we have the necessity to maintain the caloric intake of the body to keep the energy high, to keep the batteries recharged, however you want to metaphor it. But it's, again, there's nothing validating that merely because it exists. The validation has to come through something more substantial. And so if you're going to use the word purpose, I think it has to be in a context of understanding the entire gameplay and understanding whether or not you're accomplishing something. I mean, accomplishment really should be tied to the word purpose. An accomplishment should be defined by some sort of utilitarian kind of math. There has to be some kind of overview here that says there's an implication to the game, or there's going to be an accomplishment. And so I guess back to the swarm video. Maybe I'll just put this down. You know, we still have to understand that what we live for is not what nature is doing to us. I mean, you know, we're created with individual purpose that has an ultimate implication, but the implication is not direct. It is not obvious to what our personal motivations are. So we are, like I said, I'll say we, but let's just say every other mammal on Earth, if humans weren't here, they would not be trying to survive. They would be trying to feel good. That's all. They wouldn't have an ambition of, you know, perpetuating their species and worrying about their extinction, or worrying about how many of them exist, or worrying about whether the universe had life in it, or whether there was a blue planet, or any of that crap would be completely irrelevant. It would mean absolutely nothing to them. Their purpose would be entirely dictated by their personal sense organs. It would be completely detached from any understanding of the game board, their function on the board, any of that. It's all lost. So purpose is a meaningless word in that context because it has no standard. It has no logical or intellectual or wise or any of those higher value words. It can't measure up to any of that standard where you could even, again, applying a word like purpose, you diminish and turn the word into nothing. If you're going to say, you know, there's purpose in a retard picking his nose or some sort of bullshit like that. I mean, it's got to mean more than that. Yeah, and so again, I don't want to get into the technicalities again of the swarm argument, but yeah, you basically just made the same video again saying that you know, big disposability has something to do with whether something would be sentient, and I think that just ignores the argument that the reason why something is sentient is because it needs to have complex behavior. I mean, that's the core of it. You can't have complex, unique, learned behavior unless you have a sentient organism. So then all you can have is reflexes, and maybe reflexes just aren't going to make it in some circumstances, and it really depends on those circumstances. I think my analogy of the seals, I think you didn't quite get it. Maybe I didn't articulate it very well. But you know, only 2% of the male seals have any genetic impact. The rest are just shark food. The rest are just their individual purpose isn't. They don't get to play out their individual purpose. Their individual lust is completely diminished. Their genetic stake is gone. They're invested in an alpha. They're invested in a relative, a big brother, but they're not invested in their own life. And they certainly can have passion and desire, and all those things still exist inside of them. So they're not made insentient because they lack a direct genetic stake. And again, the hive is still the same thing. It's the individuals don't have a genetic stake any further than the fact that they are sort of genetically related, and therefore they have a stake in the hive genes, and that can't be denied. But it's more about how demanding the behavior is going to be will dictate the need for sentience. And there's certainly an argument that there can be very complex behavior. I mean, if you look at a bumblebee flying, it's very complex behavior, and it's basically doesn't appear to be very learned. It's like automatic. They just fly, you know. And so then maybe the fighting skills of an ant are programmed. I mean, the wrestling moves are programmed in their head. They don't need to learn how to become better fighters, and maybe there's this lack of need to do any learning, but they do learn. He also used as an example the self-sacrificing type ants that will drown to create a bridge for the ant colony to cross over their dead bodies. And none of those ants are doing it knowing they're sacrificing themselves. None of them are doing it knowing they're going to die or they're going to drown. They're doing it because they have a horniness for it. They're horny for the behavior. And if you were horny enough for something, let's say even if you were told the truth, let's say you're 15 years old and you can have sex with the most beautiful woman in the world by your perception, the most beautiful creature on earth, and you're told there's a 50-50 chance you'll instantly die if you have sex. You won't be hurt. You'll just instantly die. And there's a 50-50 chance that'll happen. You know you're going to still have sex. Okay? Because you're motivated by the passion, the desire of the moment, the love, the emotion. And you're not motivated by some idea of survival or any of that other crap. You're motivated by passion. You're motivated by this attempt to secure that top of the mountain moment, that ecstasy, perfection, beauty. These are things that you'll compromise a future to have, and especially if you don't even know that's what you're doing. If you don't even know the risk exists, so of course you're gonna take. You're gonna pounce on the opportunity. And there's not gonna be any equation here. There's not gonna be any judgment. The ants are just doing what comes very natural to them. And although it looks like suicide, it looks like sacrifice, from their perspective it's not. They're not giving up something, they're taking something. They're getting off on it, I guess is the simple way to put it. They're getting off on it. So it's not how could it be described as an act of altruism when they're completely horny for it? And again, back to the kamikaze. He's horny for the victory. He's horny for the ultimate defeat of the enemy kind of thing. And that horniness is more powerful than anything else. And so it's a powerful motivator. And so even if you created organisms that were on a death wish, even if they actually wished for death, I mean, it's even the suicide bomber is getting a personal glory in, blowing themselves up. So they're getting off on it. And I guess that's all I'm saying here is there's programming is completely compatible with those ends, and having motivating desires is completely compatible with those ends also. Being motivated to be, to wreak havoc on darkness or the bad force, or to protect your kids even, is something completely natural. And there's no reason why that would there's no reason to say there'd be no reason to be sentient in that circumstance. I mean, I think sentience really has to be connected to complexity of behavior. I mean, that's where it really only serves a purpose, is if there can be some complex reaction, or there has to be some evaluation of two competing sensations, like I've described before, but I think it's a perfect example of how sentience shows itself to be valuable, is that you can have hunger and fear. Fear of the predator who may eat you, and hunger for the fruit on the tree. And that it would be really good to have an organism that can evaluate these two things and put them in perspective. So he doesn't knee-jerk his way into going after the apple at the wrong time. That he waits till the fear subsides enough before he acts in the hunger, or he waits till the hunger gets desperate enough before he overrides the rational fear. And that's the balancing that sentience provides the opportunity for. And there's no way to create that any other way, realistically, I don't think. You can't, there's no other mechanism. You have to have some kind of value dictator to create any purpose for intelligence. Intelligence has to have a value dictator, something that tells it what has value before it can act on anything. because intelligence can't derive the value from any rational source. And that's why when we look at the game board, the only thing that matters is how much suffering we're trading for what satisfactions, and how much the weight of that deprivation is. So that's the sort of the argument, is people will argue that the pleasures outweigh the pains in the first place, but I would counter that they don't. That if we really put them on the scales, we'd see that it's the desire that is cheating the scale. Desire pushes the pleasure scale and makes it seem heavier than it actually is. And even extending that further, that desire mechanism is completely created out of a false sense of something valuable to be attained, and it creates that false sense by putting you in a negative state to start with. I think it's no coincidence that we start out life not very happy, crying a lot, because that's the state of the human condition, is a state of deprivation. I guess I'd extend that just because the baby argument is always kind of an important one, I think, in understanding the difference between human evolution and other animal evolution, because you can really see it in that slow maturation over the first 4 or 5 years. There's no other mammal that is so slow to evolve, so slow to get up and running, to be physically functional. In a substantial way, so completely disabled and lethargic and unconnected to their world as a human in its first 18 or 24 months, and that's so just very, couldn't last 2 minutes on its own, kind of thing, and that part of that might just be the difference between between a human and a great ape. Might just be that slow maturation over that first couple of years is how we are able to organize the content in our brain to provide the opportunity for language, a functional language. And it might also explain why people denied that initial exposure to language can never acquire it later, is that it has to be acquired then. The whole point of that slow maturation is to allow this acute filtering to take place. And it's the only thing that's different between a great ape and a human is that the great ape hasn't evolved that slow maturation. It didn't have the opportunity. It hasn't created enough of a safe environment where it can afford to have baby apes that are that dysfunctional for that long a period of time. And it was only because humans got into a circumstance where it was possible for that to take place, for babies to be that disabled, that we were allowed to acquire or maximize the function of our brain. Sorry about that. Rendering a video. So anyway, yeah. So I'll put this on, I'll extend the debate. I'll post your video and this as a response. And yeah, I don't think you can really separate our consciousness and our expectations, our human expectations, our human glorifications, the fact that we find flowers attractive or some other kind of bullshit, into this conversation about what the natural world would be, or what the universe is, or what we imply it to have some sort of purpose. And basically we're just, I mean, if we anthropomorphized ourselves into like bulldozers, let's say. We were the bulldozers and the other animals were just cars. Well, yeah, maybe the bulldozer would say, oh, a planet with just cars on it is so stupid. And then they would say, oh, well, a planet with no mechanical four-wheel vehicles is just stupid. And they can't understand the universe because it doesn't contain those things in it. And I think there's just a ton of human beings doing that. But we can always just look at the biology and we can see that's all this is. This is chemistry. That's all. It's a DNA molecule, and what happens to a DNA molecule when it's relatively safely placed on the right planet at the right time, and the fact that it's afforded this opportunity to get quite eccentric and bizarre, but it has really nothing to do with the underlying function of the universe and any expectation that the universe has to make sense. And you sort of say that in your comments when somebody argues that oh, the universe without people and it's just silly. How could anybody even conceive of that? And you sort of point out, well, what if the universe created just a big giant concentration camp? Are you still going to be incapable of saying it's stupid? Of course it would be stupid. It's just now the argument is just some argument between people about what kind of values are worth exchanging, how many pawns we can sacrifice and say it's still a good game. Um, and I think that argument it can be argued. But let's not try to say that if there's something inevitable about the universe having to create organisms that walk around and say, oh, yes, this all means something. I mean, there's just no reason the universe has to be anything connected to that kind of a silly expectation that something is going to be accomplished. I mean, it's just not the game. I just didn't say that very well, but I mean, it's really important to always go back to it's a DNA molecule, it's a DNA molecule, it's a DNA molecule, just competing and creating a bunch of organisms that are very self-important, but their self-importance is not a meaningful fact. Something like that, anyway. People just got to step past it and look at the chemistry of it. Yeah, yeah. All right, I'll give up for now and move on to the next argument.